Good evening, everyone. Everyone's doing well today. And the lesson that I'm going to be talking about today is something that I believe is really important to talk about, is leadership. So some of us are natural leaders and some of us are just natural followers. However, all of us have been given leadership in some areas in life. Parents have a God-given responsibility to lead their children. Even if you are not the owner or manager at your work, you might have some people or tasks that you are assigned to take the lead of. Most of us change roles depending on the situation. So when you're talking to your boss, you're in the role of subordinate. But when you're with your team or your unit, you are the leader. So regardless, we all have worked with leaders before. So Solomon was the king of Israel. Proverbs is his book of leadership wisdom. So in Proverbs, he is teaching young potential religious and political leaders the wisdom that God gave him to be king. Through studying Proverbs, we can learn to make good decisions in leadership. So I'm going to be reading from Proverbs 25, verses 1 through 5. It says, "These are also Proverbs of Solomon, which make a man of Hezekiah king of Judah copied out. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. The heaven for height, and the earth for depth, and the heart of kings is unsearchable. Take away the dross from the silver, and there shall come forth a vessel for the finer. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne shall be established in righteousness." So the word king is used 5 times in chapter 25, and over 30 times in the entire book of Proverbs. In Proverbs, Solomon acknowledges the following: God is greater than the king. God knows the wisdom of the universe, and all wisdom is found in him. God reveals his wisdom to the kings who search for it. The king is subordinate to God. The king's role is to fear God, that is, discern his wisdom and rely on his power. And the king's role is tied to God's sovereignty and his ability to make godly, wise decisions. Well, we can tell that none of us have ever been kings before, and most of us have never lived in a monarchy. However, we do experience being a leader or working with a leader almost on a daily basis. The principles of Proverbs regarding leaders apply in many areas in our life, home, church, government, and work. The attitudes and wisdom that make a good king in 1000 BC also make a good 21st century leader. Let's look at kings, leaders, and rulers first, and then make a connection to the times when we are leaders. When we are the leaders, too often we concentrate on our rights, our powers, and who is on our side. It is natural to assume that God is on our side, but what side is God really on? The Bible teaches us to focus on responsibility, not rights, service, not power, and obedience, and not taking sides. So there are many examples in the Bible, but the classic one is told in Joshua, chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. "And it came to pass, when Joshua was by Jericho, that he lifted up his eyes, and looked, and behold, there stood a man over against him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went unto him, and said unto him, Art thou for us, or for our adversaries? And he said, Nay, but as captain of the host of the Lord I am now come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth, and did worship, and said unto him, What saith my Lord unto his servant? And the captain of the Lord's host said unto Joshua, Loose thy shoe from off thy foot, and the place whereon thou standest is holy. And Joshua did so." The point is, God doesn't come to take sides. He comes to take charge. He wants us to take charge in every area of our lives, which is at home, work, politics, and in the church. So I'm going to be telling you some characteristics about a good leader that is told in the Bible. And the first one I'm going to talk about is wisdom. So in Proverbs chapter 8, verse 15, it says, By me, which is talking about wisdom, kings reign and rulers make laws that are just. Also in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 8, it says, When a king sits on his throne to judge, he winnows out all evil with his eyes. All leaders must have God's wisdom. Jesus himself was filled with God's wisdom and grace. That wisdom is different than mere knowledge. The wiser leader can see farther than others, His spiritual discernment is what sets him apart as God's leader. The church today, and in a lot of churches, are in dire need of some more wise leaders. So the second characteristic is integrity. It says in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 12, "Kings detest wrongdoing, for a throne is established throughout righteousness." And also in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 4, it says, "By justice a king gives a country stability, but one who's greedy for bribes tears it down." Personal integrity is demonstrated by who we are and what we do when no one is looking. The third characteristic is love. And in Proverbs chapter 20, verse 28, it says, "Love is faithfulness. Keep a king safe. Through love, his throne is made secure." How we love is more important than what we know or achieve. The Pharisees in Jesus' day are religious but unloving, but people don't care how much you know until you know how much you care about them. The fourth characteristic is seeking good advice. So in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14, it says, "For lack of guidance, the nation falls, but many advisors make victory sure." And in Proverbs chapter 25, verses 4 and 5, it says, "Remove the dross from silver, and out comes material for the silversmith. Remove the wicked from the king's presence, and his throne will be established through righteousness." So for every leader, they always need advice and seeking for it. The ability to listen to the advice of others is the mark of a great leader. I have an example in 1990, General Norman Schwarzkopf, the commander-in-chief of the United States forces in Operation Desert Shield, undertaken to prevent Iraq from moving against Saudi Arabia. During the days of war, he assembled 765,000 troops from 28 countries, hundreds of ships, and thousands of planes and tanks. General Colin Powell, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, every evening on the telephone to discuss the events of the day. So on the day news reporters asked why he did that, he answered that they were the only people in the world that knew what he was trying to do. That they listened to his ideas, and they helped him form strategies and expose many errors in judgment daily. So every leader needs a trusted advisor like that. The fifth characteristic is self-control. In Proverbs 28, chapter 28, verse 15, it says, "Like a roaring lion or a charging bear is a wicked man ruling over helpless people." This is basically saying the leader cannot control him. If the leader cannot control himself, he will not be able to command the respect of others. The sixth characteristic is awareness of his influence. So in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 2, it says, "When the righteous thrive, people rejoice. When the wicked rule, people groan." In almost every era now, no country has been able to rise above its leaders. For better or worse, people become like those they follow. The seventh characteristic is compassion. And in Proverbs 29, verse 14, it says, "If a king judges the poor with fairness, his throne will always be secure." So Jesus is the ultimate model of taking time for the poor, the outcasts, and the children. He was naturally drawn to the weak who needed an advocate. That is why James teaches us that pure religion is to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And the eighth characteristic is no need for public approval. In Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25, it says, "Fear of man will prove to be a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is kept safe." So, the greatest freedom is having nothing to prove and no one to impress. Good leaders are more concerned about pleasing God than their popularity with others. The desire for honor among men makes trusting God almost impossible. The leader who has his eyes on receiving the praise of men is not focused on obeying and pleasing God. The ninth characteristic is moderation. And in Proverbs chapter 31, verses 4 and 5, it says, "It is not for kings to drink wine, not for rulers to crave beer, lest they drink and forget what the law decrees and deprive all the oppressed of their rights." I've seen many leaders who were heavy drinkers that eventually, due to their lack of self-control, lost these positions of leaderships. And the final characteristic I'd like to talk about is submission to God. So in Proverbs chapter 21, verse 1, it says, "A king's heart is the hand of the Lord. He directs it like a water course wherever he pleases." And in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 5, it says, "When Christ entered the world, he said, 'Here I am, O Lord, I have come to do your will.'" This is the most important characteristic of a good leader. When a man or woman is submissive to God and his Holy Spirit, God will direct the person into the ways that he can glorify them the best. That's all I have. Brother Jeff, would you mind leading us in prayer?
Lord, Heavenly Father, we come to you for this lesson, Lord. Thank you for Tucker. Thank you for the thoughts that our minds tonight, characteristics that we all have in one way or another. Just thank you for him, the fact that he was willing to stand up and share a lesson. We pray, Lord, all those that are in our church family that are in need of prayer this evening, sick, elderly, just everyone that's in need. We're not sure of all cases, but we know that you know who needs prayer. We just pray you do each and every situation in every case. Pray, Lord, now that you be with us as we muddle our way through these unusual times. Help us be wise. Help us do what we need to do to try to stay safe. Help us, Lord, stay focused